All right. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're diving into a really fundamental concept, the common good.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, it really is. And, when we say common good, we're talking about those shared resources, the conditions, things like roads, parks, public safety, education, all that stuff, the things that, a community provides so that all its members can kind of meet their obligations to each other and look after, what binds them together, right?
Exactly. We often take those things for granted.
We really do, yeah. And for this deep dive, we're lucky to have a super in-depth resource, I think, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on the common good.
Yeah, goes deep. It gets into how philosophers have really wrestled with this concept.
Yeah, it really unpacks it all, doesn't it? And that's really what we want to do today for you. It's not just to give a definition. You can look that up yourself pretty easily these days, right? But to really unpack all those philosophical pieces, for you, as someone who's really interested in this stuff, I think you'll find it fascinating to see all the different ways you can look at something that sounds so simple on the surface.
It's anything but simple.
It's really not, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump in. One of the first big things that came up for me was, how is the common good different from other ideas that sound similar?
Yeah, that's a great starting point, I think. One thing that this source really made clear to me is how different the common good is from philosophies like welfare consequentialism, right?
Right.
Which is, this broad category that includes things like utilitarianism.
Yeah, those approaches often focus on maximizing overall well-being using some kind of independent standard of goodness, like the greatest happiness for the greatest number kind of thing. But what I found really interesting is that the common good is fundamentally relational. It's about what we owe each other because we are in this shared community together.
It's not just numbers in a calculation.
It's not just some equation, right? Think about parental duties.
Yeah.
That idea comes from this very specific relationship, right? Parent and child.
Yeah.
Not from trying to maximize, global happiness.
Yeah, that's a good example. Parents have special duties towards their children that don't apply to just any child in the world.
Exactly. So it's not just about some abstract good out there, but the, obligations that are kind of woven into our relationships in society.
Right.
Now, another thing that I noticed that people kind of get mixed up is that concept of public goods.
Right.
As economists would define them.
Right.
Things like lighthouses or national defense, those things that are non-excludable and non-rivalrous.
Yeah. I mean, those things, they certainly contribute to the common good, but the idea of the common good is just so much broader. And crucially, I think it's normative. Right?
Yeah.
It has this moral dimension to it. And, it includes stuff like support for the arts and culture, which you wouldn't, strictly speaking, put into that economic box of a public good.
Right.
I think if you're trying to connect this to the bigger picture for yourself, it's that the common good serves the interests that are just inherent in that civic relationship itself.
Yeah.
It's about those conditions that allow for a thriving shared life.
Yeah, it's not just about the stuff we share. It's about the values, the goals,
Yeah.
What are we trying to do together?
What makes a life worth living together?
Yeah, exactly. So then this begs the question, why do philosophers even think we need this idea in the first place? What problem does it solve?
It's a really good question, I think. To understand why we even need to talk about this common good thing, it helps to imagine what philosophers call a private society, right?
Right.
And this isn't necessarily some dystopian world full of selfish people, right?
Yeah.
It's more like a society where people just mainly focus on their own private lives,
Their own little bubble.
Yeah, their families, jobs, personal projects, all that. And they don't really concern themselves with the wider, common affairs.
They might be perfectly nice people.
Yeah, exactly. They might be great neighbors, but they just lack that, sense of shared responsibility.
Yeah, so someone in this private society might be super involved in their kid's school, right?
Yeah.
But they wouldn't think twice about, laws being unfair in another state because it doesn't touch them, right?
Exactly. It's out of sight, out of mind.
Right out of mind, yeah.
And a lot of philosophers, they see this as, a moral defect.
Something's missing.
Yeah, even if that society is materially successful, everyone's got their stuff, the economy's humming, but something's just not right.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting, I think, especially from a philosophical standpoint, is that it's not just about practical problems, right?
Like potholes not getting filled.
Yeah, exactly. Or like
Right.
not enough public parks. It's about this like deeper relational obligation we have. It's about citizens caring about those shared affairs. And it's a duty that, it goes way beyond those practical reasons. Like think about the different kind of reasoning we expect from someone who's acting as a judge, right?
Right.
Versus like when they're just making their own shopping list.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Totally different hats. Like when someone's in that public role, we just assume that they're going to think about something bigger than just themselves, right?
Exactly. Like they're representing the community.
Yeah.
And this brings us to this really interesting thought experiment. So imagine a society where like all the incentives are perfectly designed to make sure that all the public roles are filled, right? So, judges, legislators, they're all paid a ton of money,
Right.
but nobody actually cares about the common good. They're just in it for themselves.
Right.
And the philosophical argument here is that that lack of concern is like the problem.
Right.
It's like there's a moral failing there, even if like everything seems to be working.
Right. Yeah, it feels like even if, like you said, everything's running smoothly, there's this like emptiness at the core, right?
Yeah, something's missing.
But why does this commitment really matter in a practical way?
Well, one of the big reasons that the source points out is like think about like officials who might be facing huge personal costs, right, for doing the right thing.
Right, going against the grain.
Exactly, like upholding the law when everyone else is corrupt. Or citizens who are risking their safety to protest, or think about national defense, right?
Right.
Where people might actually have to sacrifice themselves.
The ultimate sacrifice.
Exactly. In those situations, money or other incentives might just not be enough.
Right.
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 Like that inner dedication, that becomes the real driving force when those external rewards just like aren't there.
Yeah, it goes deeper. It's a different kind of motivation, right?
Exactly. And it comes back to that whole point about our relationships with each other. Like this political bond, it's not just about doing certain things. It's also about how we think about those things.
Right, right.
And like the kind of consideration we have for other people and our reasoning. So imagine like a Supreme Court justice.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
And their only motivation is like securing some cushy speaking gigs after they retire.
Right.
That just feels wrong.
It feels wrong.
Because their role is supposed to be about this much bigger idea of the common good.
Yeah, yeah. It's like recognizing we're all connected and that our actions have these ripple effects,
Exactly.
Okay, so if we are trying to like define this idea, what are the central pieces of it?
Okay, so one key feature, and this is like really important for how we actually act in the world, is that the common good gives us this like shared standpoint for practical reasoning.
It's a way to think about things.
It's a framework. Exactly. It's not just about a list of like, do this, don't do that, right?
Right.
It's about like a whole way of thinking, deliberating together that has this built-in concern for each other.
So it's not just about what we do, but the values, the reasons why we do things. It's like the shared ethical, framework.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And another really central feature is what the source calls this set of common facilities.
Okay.
And these are like more than just physical stuff.
Right.
Obviously roads and bridges matter.
Right.
But it also includes our institutions.
Right.
Those like established ways we organize ourselves. And the source even brings up private property as an example.
Private property. Now, that's interesting. Thinking about this philosophically, that raises some questions. How can something that's so individual, be part of this common good?
That's what's so fascinating about it. The idea is that private property, like when you think about it, it's a social institution, right?
Right.
It's defined and protected by our laws, our norms,
Right.
And you can think about it as serving a common interest because it gives people this like sphere of control, right, over their environment.
Right.
And that in turn like fosters stability and productivity, which benefits everyone.
Yeah. It's like the rules of the game,
Exactly. It's the framework around it, not just the fact of ownership itself.
Right, right.
And then, you've got the idea of this privileged class of common interests.
Okay, break that down for me.
Yeah. So these are like the really fundamental abstract interests, the ones that pretty much all citizens share to, some degree. And all those common facilities we were talking about, they're supposed to serve these interests.
Okay.
So think about the interest in like just living a good life, right?
Right.
Flourishing. That's like classic Aristotle. Right. Or Think about those more contemporary ideas of rights, like bodily security, property,
Right.
Locke, Rousseau, or basic liberties and fair opportunity,
Right.
like Rawls. These are the needs, the aspirations that we all have as members of this community.
So it's not about everyone wanting the same thing in every detail, but recognizing those core shared interests, right?
Yeah, the ones that are just essential for humans to flourish together.
Yeah. And then there's this whole element of solidaristic concern.
Yeah, this is key. So this is about like how we reason. It involves giving those interests of others the same kind of weight that we give our own.
Right.
Like Rousseau had this really powerful image of defending each other with like full force.
Right.
It's that sense of like mutual support, recognizing our like shared vulnerability.
We're all in this together.
Exactly. An injury to one is an injury to all.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there were like these ways that philosophers have thought about these common interests.
Right.
And I think it's worth digging into that a bit more. Yeah.
Definitely.
So we can talk about like joint activity conceptions and private individuality conceptions.
Okay.
So joint activity views, like, Aristotle's a big one here, they see the common good as tied to our participation in a shared way of life. For Aristotle, the political community wasn't just for like defense or trade. It was this form of friendship aimed at achieving the good life.
So it's about creating those conditions together where everyone can thrive and like contribute, right?
Exactly. Like, think about like a university, right?
Oh,
With
yes.
all this intellectual and cultural activity where everyone benefits from what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, a real community of learning and growth, right?
Exactly. Now, those private individuality conceptions, they put more emphasis on like enabling individuals to live their own lives.
Right.
Make their own choices, free from interference.
Okay.
And Rawls is like the big example here. He's focused on those fundamental interests that come with being an equal citizen.
Right.
So basic liberties of conscience, thought, fair equality of opportunity, all that.
Right.
And the social things that support that, like a strong system of rights, they allow people to pursue their own idea of a good life without everyone having to agree on what that good life is.
Right. So one view stresses our participation in this shared life, and the other stresses our individual autonomy within a shared framework.
That's a really good way to put it.
It's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a fundamental fork in the road. And then within those big frameworks, there's this like distinction between communal and distributive conceptions.
Right, right.
And this is a really crucial difference for anyone who's trying to like wrap their head around this whole concept.
Yeah, unpack it a bit more.
So communal conceptions, they prioritize those common interests that we have as citizens.
Okay.
And these interests are like the starting point. They're even seen as more fundamental than our own individual private interests. And, when we're talking about political stuff, the ideal is that we set aside those personal interests and just focus on what's good for the community as a whole.
So, like, when we're debating trade regulations, we should be thinking about the overall national interest, not just how it affects our own business.
Exactly. It's like, a family dealing with a house fire.
Right.
You don't start arguing about whose possessions get saved first.
Right. Everyone's got to pitch in.
Yeah, it's about the whole family. Now, those distributive conceptions, they start by recognizing that there are all these different groups, right?
Right.
With their own interests and needs. And the common good here, it's about having fair principles for how we distribute stuff.
So like Rawls' difference principle.
Right, exactly, which tries to make things as good as possible for the least well-off.
Right. So instead of trying to like ignore those differences, the distributive view says, let's find a fair way to balance them out.
Yeah, through those social and political systems.
Right. And this is what I found really interesting. Like even Rawls, who's so focused on fairness and distribution, he actually prefers a communal conception for certain things.
Yeah, for like the most basic stuff.
Like the basic structure of society.
Yeah, when it comes to those fundamental rights, fair opportunity, all that, he calls it the principle of common interest.
So even Rawls, who is all about justice, he says when it comes down to it, we got to prioritize those shared interests we have as equals. Why is that?
I think it has to do with this idea of solidarity.
Like we're all in the same boat.
Exactly. When we focus on those common interests as citizens, it's like saying those shared concerns, they're more fundamental than our private differences.
Right. It brings us together.
And it creates a stronger sense of like, we're all in this together.
Right. And that's different from the difference principle, right?
Yeah, the difference principle, It's about helping those who are worse off,
Right.
which is important for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't quite have that same level of, like, perfect mutuality.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to, like, the real world of politics.
Okay.
How does all this common good stuff play out in a democracy?
Well, democracy and the common good, they're, like, deeply connected, you know?
Yeah.
The whole point of democracy is to make decisions together. You know, ideally, we're going beyond those purely private interests.
Right, we're not just voting for what benefits us personally.
Exactly. Like, when we vote, we're engaging with something bigger.
Yeah. And that's different from, like, that purely pluralistic view.
Yeah, that view that sees democracy as just this, like, marketplace of competing interests.
Where everyone's just trying to get their piece of the pie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as Jeremy Waldron points out, people often vote based on what they think is best for the whole society.
Right. They actually do care about the common good.
They do, yeah.
Mm.
There's this idea that the democratic process itself can help us figure out what serves those common interests.
Makes sense. We're all putting our heads together.
Exactly. And then there's this deliberative conception of democracy, where the focus is on making decisions through, like, open and reasoned discussion.
Where everyone gets to share their perspective.
Exactly. And Joshua Cohen argues that this kind of process naturally leads to a common good orientation.
Because you have to explain your views in a way that others can understand and accept.
Exactly. You can't just say, well, this is good for me, so it must be good for everyone.
Right.
And this brings us back to that tension between those communal and distributive conceptions.
Yeah. Yeah, it keeps coming up.
It does, doesn't it?
Mm.
Like, even in a democracy, are we trying to find those abstract common interests?
The things that unite us?
Exactly. Or are we trying to balance out all the different, often conflicting interests?
Yeah. It's a tough question. It's this ongoing balancing act.
It is. It's part of what makes democracy so, messy and complex.
Yeah. But it's also what makes it, vibrant and dynamic, right?
It is, definitely. So moving beyond the structures of politics, how does this common good idea show up in our everyday lives?
Like in our communities.
Yeah, how do we actually live it out? And that's where these concepts of burden sharing and resource pooling come in.
Okay.
So the common good, it's not just about voting, right? It's about going beyond our own little world in all sorts of ways.
Right.
So take national defense as an example. Like, we could just hire private armies to protect us, right?
Right.
But there's this strong sense that it's important for citizens to share in that burden.
Yeah, we all have a stake in it. It's not just a service we buy.
And that's reflected in how we treat, like, soldiers who are injured, right?
They've sacrificed for us.
Exactly. Their injuries, they carry a different moral weight than, like, someone who gets hurt in a car accident.
Right, because they were serving the community.
And Michael Walzer even argues that this idea of burden sharing, it could apply to other risky jobs too, like miners or EMTs.
Right, those essential workers.
Yeah. And then there's this whole question of resource pooling.
Okay, like, how do we actually get the money to fund all this stuff?
Exactly. The schools, the healthcare, the infrastructure, all of it. And historically, there have been a lot of different approaches, right? Like, Plato thought the rulers should just own everything collectively.
Right.
But Aristotle preferred private ownership, but with a strong sense of civic duty to, like, contribute.
Yeah, like the wealthy citizens building warships for the city.
Exactly. And, that connects to a lot of debates we have today, right?
About taxes, about philanthropy.
Exactly. Like, what's the right balance between government funding and private giving?
Right. Like, when someone like Mark Zuckerberg donates a ton of money, it raises these complicated questions.
It does, yeah. Like, it's great that he's giving, but should one person have that much power over resources that are supposed to serve the common good?
Yeah. It's a tricky issue. Okay, so let's talk about another huge part of modern life. Markets and competition.
Okay.
How do they fit in with this whole common good thing?
This is where things get really tangled. So markets can be super efficient at coordinating things, right? Like getting us the stuff we need.
Right.
But they work through this, like, self-interest logic, right? Individuals and companies are mainly trying to maximize their own profits.
Right. It's all about the bottom line.
Exactly. So think about for-profit schools. Right?
Okay.
They're not necessarily thinking about the common good of education. They're thinking about making money.
Right.
So there's this inherent tension there, right?
Yeah, between the self-interest and the common good.
Exactly. And there are, like, two big camps on this in philosophy. One side says, look, markets can be compatible with the common good.
Okay.
And, Adam Smith, Hegel, even Rawls, in some ways, they fall into this camp. They argue that markets can work, but only if they're embedded in this, strong social and political framework.
Where the common good is still guiding things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hegel thought markets were good at, specialization and stuff.
Okay.
But he also stressed that we need a political community to, debate and regulate those activities.
So the market can be a tool, but it needs to be guided by something bigger.
Exactly. Now, the other side, they're way more critical.
Okay.
Aristotle, Rousseau, Marx, they all fall into this camp. They think markets and the common good are just fundamentally at odds.
Okay.
Marx famously argued that we need to completely restructure society. We need direct social participation, conscious control over production, all that.
So not just letting the market run its course.
Yeah, he thought the whole idea of the invisible hand guiding things was just a myth.
Wow, so those are two very different perspectives.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
And contemporary philosophers are still wrestling with all this. Michael Cristiano talks about how corporate leaders should consider the common good.
Okay.
And Alan Heath says we can't just have this, purely individualistic view of economics, especially when markets fail.
Right.
And then there's this whole question of competition itself. Is competition always a good thing? Or can it turn into this, cutthroat struggle?
Right, especially when we're talking about essential things like healthcare or housing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a really complicated issue.
Yeah. Okay, so last but not least, let's talk about the connection between the common good and social justice.
Okay.
Are they basically the same thing?
Well, they're definitely related, but not quite the same. The common good, it often goes beyond those basic requirements of justice.
Okay.
In a couple of ways. First, like we talked about before, the common good involves this inner motivation, right? It's not just about following the rules, it's about actually caring about others.
Right.
And second, the common good can include a wider range of stuff, interests, aspirations that go beyond what's strictly necessary for a just society.
So justice is like the foundation and the common good builds on that.
Exactly. It's think about friendship. A just relationship, it's about fairness, respect, all that.
Right.
But a good friendship, it involves so much more.
Yeah. Right. It's about shared interests, mutual care.
Exactly. And a lot of philosophers, they see things like private property, when it's properly regulated, as both a requirement of justice and part of the common good.
Right. So it can be both.
And the common good is a really big deal in Catholic social thought, too. They see it as those conditions that allow people to flourish, with a big emphasis on human dignity and rights.
So it's a concept that pops up all over the place.
It does, yeah. It has these deep roots. But, we live in a world where people have so many different beliefs. So how can we even talk about a single common good?
Right. Doesn't that just end up being someone's idea of the good imposed on everyone else?
That's the big challenge of pluralism.
Yeah.
It's super hard to define the common good when there's no shared foundation.
Yeah.
But a lot of thinkers these days, they say the common good isn't a fixed thing.
Okay.
It's more like this ongoing process. We're constantly deliberating, debating, trying to figure it out together.
So it's always evolving.
Exactly. And disagreement. It's not a bad thing.
It's part of the process.
Yeah, it's how we learn and grow as a society. Like Michael Sandel, he talks about the importance of civic culture.
Okay.
Creating those spaces where people can talk, challenge each other, refine their views.
So the common good is this living, breathing thing.
Exactly. It's not some abstract formula.
Yeah.
It's something we create together.
Wow. So the common good, it's a lot more than just shared parks and libraries.
Yeah. It really is.
It's this whole way of thinking about how we live together, how we make decisions, how we care for each other.
It's about what kind of society we want to be.
Yeah. And for you, the listener, we hope this deep dive has given you some things to think about. What does the common good mean to you?
Yeah, what resonates with you?
And how does it apply to your own community?
What challenges are you facing?
Right. And on that note, here's a final thought for you to chew on.
Okay.
We live in a world that's so focused on individual success, everyone's got to hustle, got to get ahead. Does that help us achieve the common good?
Or does it make it harder?
It's a really big question. And we hope you keep exploring these ideas. Read those philosophers we talked about, Aristotle, Rousseau, Rawls, all those folks, and think about how the things we see in our own lives, the institutions, the policies, how do they reflect different ideas about this common good?
Yeah, it's all around us if we know how to look for it.
It really is. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for joining us on the deep dive.